Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
The proverbial axe murderer is a staple in many urban legends. This villain has been the driving force of countless works in film and fiction, and with good reason. The Villisca axe murders and the Axeman of New Orleans are just two mass murders who were very real. Many people don't know that Bristol had its very own axe murderer, and a Tennessee family suffered his wrath. West State Street was the scene of a devastating fire on November 26, 1922. James Smith's small grocery store, as well as his attached house, was consumed by flames at 1 a.m. that Sunday morning. It wasn't long before the entire building was reduced to ash. Authorities suspected arson was possible, but never imagined an even more gruesome find awaited them. Investigators sifted through the rubble in an attempt to locate the cause of the blaze. They looked for the typical elements of a house fire, but also for traces of an accelerant. They came across the first body around 4 a.m. Then they found another. Then another. They found a total of 5 bodies. The dead were James Smith, his wife, their 2-year-old daughter Ruby, Smith's niece Deline Burchfield, and her 13-year-old son Charles. The charred bodies didn't originally draw a great deal of suspicion. The fire happened in the early morning hours, in an era where entire families occasionally died in house fires. It didn't take much for a family to succumb to smoke or fumes. Then they examined the corpses and found reason for alarm that far superseded simple arson. Each body had a crushed skull. The body of Charles drew the most disgust because remnants of the boy's brain matter had been beaten down into the charred mattress springs. Chief David L. Heberlin of the Bristol, Tennessee Police already had a suspect. Together with Bristol, Virginia Police Chief Crosswhite, they put out a formal alert for the man known as Ben Burchfield, Deline's estranged husband, and Charles's stepfather. Heberlin was an old-time officer who wore 2 pistols and could fire as proficiently with one hand as the other. Burchfield was a 41-year-old employee of McMillan's Diner on State Street. He was a strange, troublesome man who'd already had more than one encounter with Heberlin. Burchfield was known for heavy drinking and heavy brawling. His marriage with Deline had been troubled for some time, so the authorities were already familiar with the Smith family. The authorities eventually found Burchfield in Johnson City, Tennessee. It was apparent he'd walked almost the entire way from Bristol. It was only noon, but he looked as if he'd labored for days. His clothing was dirty, sweaty, and bloody. A chunk of body matter still clung to his collar. He couldn't explain why his clothing was so gory or why he walked to Johnson City. He claimed someone picked him up and drove him for a while, but the authorities were skeptical. Heberlin suspected Burchfield had psychological issues long before they apprehended him. Burchfield was illiterate, a relatively common ailment for the era, but it seemed this common handicap disguised what was a deeply disturbed mind. Burchfield didn't cover his tracks after the tragedy, but it seems he never meant to. Heberlin had visited the Smith home 2 months before the massacre when Burchfield told both Mrs. Smith and Deline he'd swallowed poison. A bottle of carbolic acid sat on the nightstand. Burchfield said his wife wanted to leave him and he didn't want to live without her. They lived with Deline's uncle James at that time. Heberlin noticed Burchfield was unusually calm for someone who'd taken such a powerful poison. Carbolic acid caused burns in the esophagus and stomach, kidney failure, discolored skin, convulsions, and a myriad of horrific symptoms. He took Burchfield to City Hall, where he confessed he hadn't actually taken anything. He just wanted to frighten the women. Heberlin was irritated, but let Burchfield go with the promise that he would leave the area and wouldn't bother the family any longer. Burchfield went to West Virginia for several weeks, but he didn't stay gone. He came back to torment the Smith family just 2 weeks later. Life continued in the Smith household, but then took another dark turn. 2 weeks before the murders, Burchfield demanded Heberlin arrest Deline because she was going to divorce him. The authorities did not arrest her, and again warned Burchfield to leave the Smith family, including Deline, alone. Both Mrs. Smith and Deline beseeched Heberlin to run Burchfield out of the area, but Heberlin was unable to pursue the man unless he committed a crime. They informed the chief then that Burchfield had threatened to kill them all, but there weren't any laws against empty threats. Oscar Wampler, taxi driver, picked Burchfield up in the west side of Bristol on Saturday, November 25th, at around 11 p.m. Burchfield asked Wampler to take him to the Smith home. Wampler dropped him off, as he did with any other fare. There was nothing remarkable or memorable about Burchfield's manners or demeanor, certainly nothing indicative of what was to come. Burchfield just asked Wampler to return in a few hours to take him to Johnson City. Wampler couldn't return at the designated time because of an unforeseen delay. Authorities believed Burchfield then set out to Johnson City on foot. No one established his reason for the trip, but speculation noted it was likely to be with his relatives. The Burchfields were Carter County natives, but most lived in Johnson City. The Johnson City authorities arrested him without resistance. They then turned Burchfield over to Heberlin's department. The victim's remains had been taken to Sturchey's undertaking parlor. Heberlin escorted Burchfield to identify the bodies. Heberlin paid close attention to Burchfield's reactions. Despite claiming to have loved his wife and her family, he showed no emotion towards the dead. He trembled slightly when forced to view his wife's body, but regained composure. He didn't shed a single tear. The bodies were buried on November 27th. Both Mrs. Smith and Deline beseeched Heberlin to run Burchfield out of the area, but Heberlin was unable to pursue the man unless he committed a crime. They informed the chief then that Burchfield had threatened to kill them all, but there weren't any laws against empty threats. Burchfield then went from the undertaking parlor to the Bluntville jail. Heberlin knew they had their man. The preliminary hearing was held on November 28th. Burchfield professed his innocence, despite the condition he was in when authorities picked him up. Several reports emerged that James Smith had $800 on his person from selling some real estate on Saturday. They suspected Burchfield stole the money before the murders. Burchfield didn't keep a low profile during the turbulent marriage to Deline. A number of witnesses came forward to share what they'd seen and heard. Burchfield had threatened Deline and the entire Smith family on a number of occasions. He'd physically whipped Deline in front of others and even shot her in the head several months earlier. Fortunately, the bullet just grazed her scalp. Burchfield was obsessed with the idea of his wife with another man. No amount of solace could sway his overwhelming jealousy. As far as could be found, there was never another man in her life beyond her relatives. Another witness came forward and testified Burchfield said he would kill the whole bunch of them out there. Burchfield's trial ended on January 25, 1923. Arguments concluded, and the case was placed in the hands of the jury at 10 p.m. The jury returned the verdict at 9:30 the next morning. Burchfield was guilty on 5 counts of first-degree murder without mitigating circumstances. The authorities established that Burchfield crept into the home, took an axe to his victims while they slept, and set the home on fire to destroy the evidence. The jury was discharged upon reading the verdict. The defense argued for a new trial until 3 p.m., but Judge Vines refused and handed down the death sentence. This is the second case where a capital punishment sentence was delivered in Sullivan County, Tennessee. Burchfield was to go to the electric chair on March 17th. The convicted murderer was immediately taken to Nashville. Burchfield's father and sister immediately set out to change the verdict, although there was little they could do. They were somewhat successful. Burchfield got a stay of execution on March 6th, and his case went before the Tennessee Supreme Court. He eventually went before a panel of alienists, or psychiatrists, at Nashville's Central Hospital, where he was mentally evaluated. He was formally diagnosed with a low mentality. This was a term for a mentally challenged individual. The panel found that while he was ignorant of many things, he was completely aware of his behavior and knew what he was doing. He was sane enough to be tried and punished for his crimes. Amazingly enough, Burchfield received respite after respite. Tennessee's Governor Austin Peay had a history of staying all executions scheduled during his administration. PA believed executions blemished his political record, so he had intervened in all of them thus far. He then got Burchfield's case. PA deliberated the tremendous volume of paperwork associated with the case. He consulted with Burchfield's loved ones. He labored for an impressive 16 hours before reaching a decision. He decided his political reputation would be stained if he did intervene, so he supported the Sullivan County Court. Burchfield was relatively calm as his execution approached. His father continued working to get further respites, but their luck ran out in early 1925. Burchfield was taken to the electric chair on January 14th at 6:50 a.m. He died in the Tennessee State Prison in Nashville. His body was returned to Johnson City for burial. Harold Lachon had a mission: to cover the Smith-Burchfield case in December 1922 for the Knoxville Journal and Tribune. His journey was put to the test when his plane collided with a telephone wire and crashed on the grounds of the historic Bristol Country Club. Though Lachon and the pilot were hurt, their injuries were not serious. The country club has stood the test of time, still alive and well after 125 years. A fateful incident preceded a momentous move in 1923. The Sturkey brothers, undertaking and furniture company, fell into the hands of J.W. Huff. He was the founder of the J.W. Huff Funeral Service, ultimately changing its name to Huff Cook. Finally, after years serve as Governor P managed to achieve his life's goal, he would exit office at the end of his third term. His prophecy of death before his tenure in office came to fruition. The story still doesn't end, even after Burchfield's execution. The lot where the Smith house stood became a subject of infamy afterward. Legend says that Burchfield's ghost is forever cursed to walk the scene of his crime. Many witnesses at the time reported seeing a shadowy figure move across the ruins, but it disappears if they tried to communicate with it.
This is just a reminder to subscribe to enjoy our growing collection of paranormal content. Don't forget to like your favorite episode and ring the bell to be notified of new content. As always, thanks for watching.